Hey everybody, it's GauntletX and welcome back to some more Magic Arena. Today I'll be playing the Festival Harvest Fair event. This is an event for 2,500 gold or 500 gems to play with 7 pre-constructed decks as much as you want, and you do unlock a card style for your first 5 wins. The card styles on offer are Candlegrove Witch, Harvesttide Infiltrator, Dawnheart Mentor, Suspicious Stowaway, and Catilda Dawnheart Prime. So since this is an event focusing around pre-constructed decks, that is all you will be earning throughout this event. You'll get your daily rewards, daily or weekly challenge progress, but you will not be keeping any cards from the decks in the event. Simply an event you can play for fun or for those card styles on offer. So we're going to take a look and go through all of these 7 decks here real quick. As always, there will be a timestamp in the description below if you want to skip past and straight ahead to the gameplay. But without further ado, let's take a look at the 7 decks and show off what these strategies are on offer in the pre-constructed decks to choose from that you get to kind of rent during this event to play against other players with these decks. So first off, Community Meeting is going to be a Naya Humans deck, so a green, red, white Humans tribal deck. You have a lot of creatures in this deck. The vast majority of this deck being creatures. I believe the only non-creature cards here are Journey to Oblivions. So you have a ton of creatures. You're going to be dumping them onto the board very quickly here with a lot of 1, 2 mana, and 3 mana creatures. There are several options for how to play this deck based on how you draw. You could just be dumping those creatures out to get a lot of very early damage in and try to flood the board as quickly as possible, but you potentially also have cards like Catilda here, allowing you to use all your human creatures to give you a bunch more mana to ramp into some big plays, such as Sigarda here buffing your whole field. You could get Sigarda out early, of course, with the ramp from Catilda. Maya buffs your whole field and spits out more tokens as you play lands, so you do have the potential to ramp out some big cards early with Catilda, but you could also just be dumping a bunch of creatures super fast and beating down on your opponent, hopefully before they've established much onto their board. So a very creature-focused, very aggressive 3-color strategy here, and a pretty fun-looking deck. Next up, we have Hall of Monsters. This is the blue-green deck on offer, and you can already see a pretty big difference from the last deck. It is very similar in that it has a very high creature count, however, this time a ton of singleton cards in the deck. As you can see, all of the 2-drops, there's only 1 copy of each of these. All of the 5-drops, only 1 copy of each of these as well. And the reason behind that is you have a full playset of Volo Guide to Monsters, and this deck is very much built around Volo. It's even in the name, the Hall of Monsters there. So Volo allows you to create a copy of every creature spell that you cast as long as it doesn't share a creature type with something else on your board or in your graveyard. So this is a deck using a wide variety of creatures and trying to get max value out of Volo's ability. That can be very much a basic kind of aggressive strategy, just duplicating your creatures to really beat down. Maybe you play Volo turn 4 and then just slam down a Battle Mammoth turn 5. All of a sudden you have 2 6/5s with trample on turn 5, but you also have some synergy, some combos to try to do with Volo, doubling up Enter the Battlefield effects with Volo's ability. All of a sudden Quandrix Cultivator, you're going to be grabbing multiple lands twice. You're going to be gaining extra life off of Springmane Servant, tapping extra creatures off of Scion of Stygia, venturing into the dungeon twice off Displacer Beast. So some good Enter the Battlefield effects to copy with Volo, and there's a big standard powerhouse in this deck, Esika's Chariot, that can also copy any token that you control every time the Chariot attacks. So of course, when your tokens are copies of whatever creature you've cast in your deck, you could get some really sick copies of some super powerful tokens late game with Esika's Chariot. So a really fun Simic aggro deck there. Here in blue-white, with a splash of red, we have the Haunted House. This is a Spirit Tribal deck using Patrician Geist as kind of the main card for this strategy. Patrician Geist gives all of your spirits +1/+1. Most of the creatures in this deck are spirits or turn into spirits after they are recast from your graveyard, and this makes all of your spells cast from your graveyard cost 1 less to cast. So this is really good with Flashback and Disturb. These are both the abilities that allow you to recast cards from the graveyard, and of course all of the Disturb creatures in the deck, such as Overwhelmed Archivist, Devoted Graphkeeper, and Baithook Angler do come back from your graveyard as spirits, so they'll be getting +1/+1 when they're flipped as well. You also have some very powerful standard cards like Skyclave Apparition, this being a spirit and a removal spell, all on a stick. The Alrund's Epiphany being a massive finisher, giving you an extra turn, an extra untap step, an extra draw step, and mainly an extra combat step here to really bash down on your opponents. And of course, the red splash in this deck is for some more spirit synergies, with Quintorius being the main reason to be in red. Quintorius being a 2/4 that gives all of your spirits +1 power as long as it's on the board. That definitely adds up on your damage there, but you're also creating more spirit tokens every time a card leaves your graveyard. So every time you cast a disturb spell from your graveyard, every time you cast a flashback spell from your graveyard, and even if you exile a good old jack-o'-lantern from your graveyard, you will be spitting out a 3/2 spirit every time you do so. So a blue-white spirits deck with a lot of graveyard synergies, and the splash for Quintorius there. So very fun blue-white spirits / graveyard synergistic deck there. The fourth deck on display is Light Show. This is a blue-red spells deck. Very classic stuff here. It's going to be using a lot of cheap interactive spells, Igneous Inspiration, Play with Fire as cheap removal spells. Divide by 0 is good interaction because it's a counter spell or removal spell. Only temporary on both halves of that, but it definitely slows down your opponent, hopefully long enough for you to survive and cast your big splashy payoffs in this deck. And of course, at the later mana costs, the payoffs for playing a deck that's mostly instants and sorceries are going to be Seize the Storm here, creating giant trampling tokens with power equal to the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard and exile, and Serpentine Curve, creating XXs, where X is the number of instants and sorceries in your grave and exile. And then you also have some standard powerhouses in this deck, like Smoldering Egg, a full playset of the Smoldering Egg. If you haven't played with or against this in Standard yet, it is one heck of a card. The Dragon Egg here gets a counter on it for each mana spent on your instants and sorceries. So if you cast a 3-mana instant, you'll get 3 counters onto it. Once it has 7 counters, you flip the egg into a 4/4 flyer that damages any target for 2 damage every time you cast an instant or sorcery spell. So a really big card, once this is flipped, can close out a game really quickly, dealing additional damage to your opponent, or can help you firmly get back on your feet and get control of the board state by giving you a giant flying blocker that also potentially chips away at more of your opponent's creatures with that 2 damage alternatively. So really nice blue-red spells here. You also do have some learning, 4 copies of Igneous Inspiration and 3 copies of Divide by 0, all going to learn a lesson from your sideboard. So you've got a nice package of lessons to pick from in this deck, all of which are, of course, sorceries, which will add to your sorceries engrave count or sorceries cast count to combo with Seize the Storm, Serpentine Curve, and Smoldering Egg. So blue-red instants and sorceries deck there with the Light Show. Looks like some fun stuff. Fifth deck we have here is the white-black deck, Old Time Revival. This is a white-black cleric tribal deck with some other synergies in it. The main one being, of course, the vast majority of the creatures in this deck are going to be clerics, which means that actually every creature in this deck, I believe, is a cleric. But anyways, that means that your cards like Cleric of Life's Bond will trigger on any creature entering your battlefield. You will gain an additional life there, which puts another +1/+1 counter on the cleric, so this can get big really quickly. You also have Skemfar Shadow Sage to gain a bunch of life or deal a bunch of damage to your opponent. The amount of damage is equal to the number of clerics that you have on board in this deck. You have Crippling Fear to be a one-sided board wipe, because all of your creatures will pretty much always be clerics. Technically, you could get some angel tokens with Amiria's Call, but basically all clerics in here. And then you also have cards like Haunting Voyage that can return your entire graveyard back to the battlefield, since all of your creatures in grave will share a card type. So if you foretell this, you'll just bring your entire graveyard back. So some really fun synergies in this black-white deck, some good cheap interaction with the Infernal Grasps and the Wrath of Crippling Fear, and some fun enter the battlefield synergies with Teleportation Circle, allowing you to blink one of your creatures every turn and redo its enter the battlefield effect. So drawing more cards off of Priest of Ancient Lore, making your opponent discard more cards off of Elderfang Disciple, gaining more life off of Skyclave Cleric, so much and so forth and so on. So the sixth deck is the Scary Storytime deck. This is going to be a green-black sacrifice deck. You have a lot of cheap creatures like Eye Twitch and Shambling Ghast, both of which have good abilities when they die, so good sacrificial fodder there. You also have some token production with Hunt for Specimens making a pest, Jadar constantly making decayed zombies to sacrifice, and Callous Blood Mage making a pest as well. And then you're getting good value when creatures are dying with cards like the Meat Hook Massacre, making your opponent lose a life whenever one of your creatures dies, and Double Dreadhound doing the same. You have cards like Demogoth Woe Eater that is going to be using those creatures as sacrificial fodder to make sure that this giant 7/6 stays on the board, or alternatively, you can always sacrifice the Demogoth itself to have your opponent discard a card and have you draw a card. But then you've just got some cheap draw spells to sacrifice cards for a playset of Deadly Dispute and a playset of Village Rites. So a green-black sacrifice deck here. We do have some more lessons in the sideboard of this one because Hunt for Specimens and Eye Twitch will all be learning for a lesson from the sideboard. So plenty of options here. One of the big ones being Pest Summoning, giving you even more sacrificial fodder. Mascot Exhibition, giving you a finisher or sacrificial fodder, whatever you're feeling like at the time. So a nice Golgari sacrifice deck here. And then last but not least, the Wax Museum deck is going to be a Rakdos tokens deck. We do have a snow sub-theme. Most of the lands in this deck will be snow lands. That makes it so Faceless Haven can beat up your opponent. Priest of the Haunted Edge can sacrifice itself to get rid of most creatures. And Frostbite will be doing that additional damage, doing the 3 damage for only 1 mana. But a lot of the power in this deck is going to be based around dumping a lot of tokens onto the battlefield. You have 3 copies of Rotten Reunion, making a decayed zombie, 4 copies of a pair of goblins. That is an octuplet of goblins there. 2 Dwarven Reinforcements for some dwarves there, and you have 6 Planeswalkers in this deck. So you have Zerial, which can create tokens with her 0 mana ability, Lolth can create tokens with her -3 ability, and Professor Onyx is just a big old game-ending Planeswalker here. So a little bit of token production for sure in this deck. You can get out really quick, making a ton of creatures onto your board, and then trying to finish the game off with something like Doomscar Titan to buff your whole board, or a pair of goblins, alternatively charging your board to deal a bunch of extra damage, or alternatively you can play the long game, just try to get some Planeswalkers on the board and protect them with a bunch of little 1/1 tokens that can keep chump blocking, making sure that your Planeswalkers stay on the board, creating even more value, potentially getting multiple abilities off on these Planeswalkers, drawing a ton of cards with Lolth, or making a bunch of spiders, of course, drawing a bunch of cards, or destroying a bunch of creatures with Professor Onyx, just all that good stuff that Planeswalkers can do when you have plenty of creature tokens to have your Planeswalkers sit behind, and a good amount of removal, 3 Poison the Cup, and 4 Frostbite, even the 4 Priest of the Haunted Edge working potentially as removal as well, and you have the 1 playset of the super bonkers Planeswalker, Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter. This card often just ends the game pretty much as soon as it hits the board, so kind of a Planeswalker heavy deck for the black-red deck, but a token theme as well to that one. So those are the 7 decks on offer. I will be showcasing a variety of them this time. I'm not going to play the same deck every round. I think I'm going to swap the deck every time because most of these decks look really fun to me, and I'm going to be playing until I get my 5 wins. So with the whole intro out of the way, which of course you can skip if you are not interested in those decks, but I assume that's all out of the way now, let's go ahead and get some gameplay with as much of these decks as possible. But I'm going to start... Let's just start at the beginning. Start with the community meaning Humans Tribal deck. Alright, here we are in game 1 with a quite slow hand. We do have turn 2 Catilda into turn 3 Blade Historian. That could be pretty threatening, but our next card isn't going to come out till turn 4, turn 5. We're not going to have a lot of creatures on board. I think I'm going to mulligan this one. I'm not sure if that's right, but I think that this deck definitely has a lot of cheap creatures, has a pretty good aggressive curve. I don't like having the double 6 drop here, and I do think this is a format you can mulligan much more aggressively than limited, because these decks are quite powerful, as you can see from the mana base being just chocked full of rares. And these decks are quite powerful on curve. I think I get rid of Spark Mage here. I do like having a piece of removal, a piece of interaction, but curving out into a Sigarda seems like a pretty impressive start here, especially since we are on the play. So if we just curve into this turn 4 Sigarda to give all our creatures +1/+1, hopefully we can get some big beatdowns really quickly here with the Archpriest. Alright, so this is red or green, this is green or white. Let's play this as green and then the other one as red, so we have all 3 colors here. And we do just immediately redraw the Thundering Spark Mage, so a great draw there. Our Archpriest of Iona, just turn 2 is going to be a 2/2 since we have a Cleric and a Warrior for our party. So we're off to a really great start this game. Very aggressive stuff to start it off. Mink's Beloved Ranger is the draw for the turn, making sure we have a 3-mana play as well. So Eye Twitch, if this dies, our opponent learns. They can grab a lesson, but if our creature dies, we do get a 1/1 warrior to replace it, which means we will still have 2 creatures in the party. The Archpriest will be just as big. So I'm just going to go ahead and send in the Shieldmate. It's not the greatest trade ever. We're both getting value off of our creatures dying. But I'm pretty fine with the trade since we'll still have a warrior on the board there and keep the Archpriest large. And it gets one of their blockers out of the way. So great curve here. The drawn Minx on turn 3 is exceptional because that's 4 more power and toughness on the board plus the ability to make something an XX giant whenever we need. Now a Thundering Spark Mage can be the play for turn, or Sigarda, both being pretty sweet. I guess we actually don't have the second white here. This is not a red-white dual land, so no Sigarda here, but Spark Mage is going to be pretty good. Going to go ahead and clear out one of those pest tokens so that we can attack with everything with at least 2 toughness without it dying, and that is what I shall do. Keep that pressure on. Make sure they don't have any good blocks at this point, so we're not losing any creatures. Because as soon as we hit our second white source here, the Sigarda will be buffing most of our field with +1/+1. I won't be buffing good old Boo the hamster, but everything else will get +1/+1 here, and we'll have a massive attack. Oof, the Meat Hook Massacre from the green-black deck here. Very big board wipe effect, very good stuff from our opponent. But Realm Walker is a very good follow-up to a board wipe that can keep us fueled with more draws. Anytime we have a creature on top of our library, it will be a human, which means we'll have more stuff to cast. I guess unless we hit more Sigardas, that'd be a bad time for us because Sigarda is legendary. So we won't be drawing it off the top since it's not a human, and it'll just be stuck in our hand, uncastable. But here we do hit the second white source for Sigarda, which is pretty great here. Get in that extra damage. Attack for 7 here. The Meat Hook Massacre is legendary, so if they play another copy, they won't keep both on the board, but they can still give -X/-X, and there are 3 copies in their deck. So I think that is the only thing that could really go wrong for us. If they've drawn a second copy of Meat Hook Massacre, that will be a very bad sign, but other than that, we're pretty set here, but they have hit the double Meat Hook Massacre there. So that is going to keep everything dealt with for now. Just pass our turn here, see what happens. And they are still at 9 life here. And the Hostile coming on out gives them a good way to sacrifice any small tokens they create if they don't need them to chump block with. They have hit all 3 copies of Meat Hook Massacre because they milled one of them. So that's pretty crazy. Yeah, we're just going to start getting beaten down by the 6/6 Dreadhound here. Rockfall Vale coming in. And Daemogoth Woe Eater coming in. And that is going to sacrifice itself unless they play another creature here. Because I don't think they'll sacrifice the Dreadhound. Ooh, they're going to sacrifice it to the Deadly Dispute. Go ahead and make us discard a card, and they draw a card. They gain a bunch of life as well, and get a treasure token. So some great sacrifice synergies going on from the Golgari deck here. But this game was pretty much all in on the double Meat Hook Massacre as the game-winning cards, but that is going to be the end of the game there. We can make 1 blocker with Tazri. That is not enough to survive the 3 attackers. Alright, so we are on the play here. Pretty good curve. Neverwinter Dryad, we can foretell a Packmate and definitely cast that. We only have 2 lands here, but Neverwinter Dryad grabs a 3rd. We have the card the deck is built around. Sure, we have some really expensive cards here, But there's enough going for this hand that I'm going to keep it. I think the synergies here are really good. We have what we're focused on, Volo Guide to Monsters, and we have at least 3 mana with the Dryad, and the Packmate draws us another card when we play this. We can play it with only 2 lands on the board, so that helps dig for a land as well. Not as efficiently as the Dryad, but can still do so, should be a great hand if we hit lands. If we don't, we still have ways to try to dig for them. So another game against the Black-White Clerics deck here, and now is where we just go off. Our Neverwinter Dryad here is going to pull out the 3rd land. We're going to get 4 mana total. Just making the attack here because we might get a damage out of the Dryad. We're just going to sacrifice it anyway, so we might as well see if we get that little extra bit of value. I guess alternatively we could have held it back and tried to get a block off of it, but don't think that'll be the case here. So Lunarch Veteran and Cleric of Life's Bond. Kind of redundant in this deck. I feel like the Cleric's deck was built a little strangely. The Clerics of Life's Bond, it's in a Johnny's Pridemate, but it only triggers once per turn, and its ability already gains them a life whenever they play a creature, because every creature in that deck is a Cleric. So having Lunarch Veteran plus Cleric of Life's Bond, you don't actually get 2 counters there. So a little weird choice in the deck build from Wizards there on that pre-constructed deck. But Lunarch Veteran still gains you a lot of life. You still get it out turn 1, and it is a Cleric on both halves of the card, so I guess it's just for that. So we are just slamming down a Volo turn 4, even if they kill it immediately. We have a backup, and if they don't kill it immediately, we're going to start going off. We get double Packmate here, draw a couple cards, but our opponent's going off as well. Double Cleric of Life's Bond. These are going to get a +1/+1 counter pretty much every turn guaranteed. So these are going to be beating us up real fast here. Alright, so we cast a Packmate, foretell a Mammoth, or hold up a Quandrix command. What does this do? Return a creature planeswalker to its owner's hand. Really good against a Cleric with a bunch of counters on it. Counter an artifact or creature, put some counters on a creature, or shuffle cards back. So put a couple counters on a creature and bounce one of theirs. That seems really good, but I think we want a little more creatures out before we try to do that. So let's cast Packmate first. We also draw a couple cards off of this, get 2 enter the battlefield effects, so hopefully hit our 5th land. Fingers crossed, that would be excellent, and we certainly do. And now we can pass the turn with a good amount of blockers here. We can double block one of those Cleric of Life's Bond to try to kill that. And now potentially next turn we get to hold up Quandrix command for that great interaction and still cast an Intrepid Outlander because we'll have 5 mana total. Alternatively, if we just hit our 6th mana and they don't kill Volo, we can just play 2 7/6s and gain 6 life. That's pretty huge. Ooh, Crippling Fear is going to be a big one here. The Cleric deck does have 3 copies of Crippling Fear, which is going to be excellent against pretty much any of the other decks. All non-Clerics just get -3/-3 until end of turn, wrath the board really quickly there. So if we hit a land here, we'd be able to go Volo, Intrepid Outlander, and have 3 creatures out, but we only have 5 mana, so we can play Battle Mammoth, or we can play Volo, Bind the Monster. Probably our 2 best options. Bind the Monster is going to be painful. We do take 4 damage to stop their Cleric of Life's Bond. I was going to say Life's Blood. That's not what it is, though. Battle Mammoth only blocks 1 creature, and if they gain life, that's going to be a 5/5 anyway, which will trade into the Mammoth. Ooh, I kind of actually like Outlander hold up Quandrix command. This could be super wrong, but if our opponent doesn't have instant speed interaction, this could go really well for us. We put their Cleric of Life's Bond back into their hand, make our Outlander a 4/5. We kill their 4/4 Cleric and bounce their 5/5 Cleric by doing that. And we still keep our Intrepid Outlander on the board, so I think it's our best option here, because if they have no responses, it works really well for us. So let's see. They do have 2 mana up. They could have a 2 mana instant speed removal spell. I believe the Cleric deck does have one of those. But maybe it doesn't. I didn't take a super huge peek at the decks. I haven't fully memorized them. So return the 5/5. Make our 2/3 a 4/5. Alright, an excellent combat step for us. We take no damage. Clear 2 of their creatures off the board. 1 is going to come right back, but the other one gone permanently. And now we just have a 4/5, which will block very well from this point on. So great combat step for us. Alright, and the recast of the Cleric of Life's Bond now. And we do hit the 6th mana to play a big old Herd Gorger if we want. Gain 3 life and get a 7/6 to block with. I kind of like going to 6 life here and just playing Volo and Bind the Monster. Could be wrong, because we're taking a lot of damage and they'll have multiple creatures on the board that could attack in well, but I'm going to get greedy here. We're going to tap down the Cleric of Lifespawn while it's at its smallest, so it does the least amount of damage from our Bind the Monsters. And now if Volo doesn't die here, we get huge value and can really try to take over this game. If Volo does die here, we're under, I guess, not immense pressure. We can still block the 2-1 and just take 1 damage. Yeah, no, this is actually a pretty safe play. This is, I think, definitely right here. So our opponent can gain a ton of life here, but eventually you get enough 7/6s on the board. You can beat an opponent even if they have 100 life, so hopefully this is where we start coming back. We'll see. 2 cards in hand from our opponent. We're at 6 life, but that is soon to be 12. Alright, Selfless Glyphweaver coming out on the board. That means they do not have the Deadly Vanity to board wipe later, but they do have the ability to give their whole field indestructible on the board, so we'll need to keep track of that. That could be useful later. For now, even giving the whole board indestructible, they don't have great attacks just because their board is not that wide. Alright, they are tapped out with 1 final card in hand for the future. Alright, so we do draw a land here for the future, but let's just go ahead and gain 6 life, go up to 12, have multiple 7/6 to block with. Don't mind if I do. Thank you very much, Volo. Up to 9 and up to 12. Our Herd Gorger's doing a very good job with whatever they're doing. What does herd gorging even mean? Gorging yourself is like eating stuff? Oh, it's eating the sheep, so that's how it's gaining the life? Is that the idea here? It's like using the little cane there as a toothpick. I stopped looking for 1 second and we are back down to 6. Another Skemfar Shadow Sage from our opponent, making us lose a life for each cleric on their board. 6 clerics, that is a painful hit, but a Babel Mammoth from us now. Get some 6/5 tramples. Why don't we? Ba-doop. And then we're going to get some 1/1 flying death touches, but let's actually go ahead and do that main phase too. Let's send in some 7/6s here. We'll still have 6 blockers after this attack, and they only have 5 attackers, so a pretty safe attack here. Just send them in, let our opponent do whatever kind of chump blocks they want, or they're going to kill one of the Herd Gorgers. But that means we get rid of the Glyphweaver, so we don't have to worry about that effect later. Pretty happy with that trade, because we have tons of creatures to spare with Volo's ability going off. So double Needlethorn Drake now. Some excellent blockers. And then we'll just start attacking with some trampling battle mammoths. They no longer have a Glyphweaver to protect their field. Another Volo if our first Volo dies. Nice. Nice. Only 4 attackers here, so send in all but 4 of our creatures. Start putting the beat down on our opponent. So there is the 2 mana interaction there. Battle Mammoth, though, going to draw us 2 cards because we have 2 instances of its ability on the board. So we draw 2 cards anytime any of our cards are targeted by one of their spells or abilities. So that is an excellent synergy with Volo that I didn't even notice. But yeah, I thought the Battle Mammoth was just whenever it becomes the target, but it's whenever any of our cards do. Prosperous Innkeeper, another great combo with Volo. Now we get to gain 2 life anytime another creature is going to enter our battlefield. Start sending in the flyers here. We still have 4 blockers left. A couple chump blocks with the Innkeepers, but we eat a creature up with our 4/5, eat a 1/1 up with our 3/2, or they're 1/3 up with our 3/2. Alright, a massive block on our 7/6 to go ahead and trade for that. Let's do 5. I actually agree with this. Don't kill this because it'll come back as a flyer. We don't want them to do that. So yeah, just kill the 2/5 and the 2/1 here, I suppose. Seems good to me. But get in for the rest of the damage and whittle down their number of blockers. Pass the turn here. Our opponent's deck does have some Elderfang Disciples. They're 2 mana 1/1s that make us discard a card when they play them. So we're going to hold on to this land so we can keep Volo in hand even if they hit that. Probably should have been doing that earlier, but I just wasn't thinking about that potential. And now we've got more than enough mana with the double treasures from Innkeeper for sure. So we can hold on to a land or 2 here. Definitely holding on to 1, but I think I'm okay with just the 1. We want to get some value off of Outlander. I still like holding back at least 1 really big, sturdy blocker, so I think I'm just going to keep holding the 4 or 5 back, even though we could be getting those Pack Tactics adventures into the dungeon. If they go to exactly 13 life, they can flip this Jaren into a big old flying trample lifelinker. So maybe they're doing the math really well here to do that, but I know we're doing extra damage to them. They can throw life gain wherever they want it, but we have trample as well. Let's see if our opponent is better at math than I am. Are they going to flip a Jaren here? Yes, they are going to go to 13 life, flip a Jaren. They can attack for 6 there. Oh no, but they lose 1 life from Jaren's ability. So they'll have to send the token in to gain a life here. Jaren is a really difficult card to play around with, because you have to be remembering when your creatures enter or die, you're going to lose a life. You can throw lifelink where you need it. Beginning of their end step, when they're at 13, they flip it for 6. Alright, so send that in so it can gain the 1 life and put them at 13 life to flip that. We don't have any creatures we can sacrifice, so that's just going to happen. Alright, well, make the block anyway. But Jaren is going to turn into a big old scary flying trampler that can draw them some cards during their end step here. So we'll need to hold back these flying blockers to stop all that trample damage. They're at 13 life. Can we pressure them with a potential 13 damage here? If we attack with everybody, they block here, take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We don't hit them for 13 if they block here. But if they block here, they take 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We hit them for 13. No, this has lifelink too? Oh, dang. Ormondal has lifelink, so we definitely can't pressure them for 13. I think we just attack with the 6-5 on the ground here. And then hold back our reach and death touchers, so we can stop a bunch of the trample damage with the reacher, and we can of course kill Ormondal with the death touchers. So we'll just send in the 1 creature that would trade with Ormondal if they block. This is going to be a close one. They get to sacrifice that cleric to draw another card. Anytime they block with Ormondal, they'll gain 6 life. If they attack with it, they'll gain 6 life. But we have the good blockers for it. We have all that reach to stop that damage from trampling over, and we have the death touch to kill it. Crippling Fear, though. Second copy of Crippling Fear here. Going to wipe our board outside of the reacher, which I think just calls it here. I think the double Crippling Fear is too much. We do have our backup Volo, I suppose, if we draw really well, but now we either stop 2 damage by chump blocking with this Outlander or go to 1 life. We just go to 1 here. Golden Ratio. Draw multiple cards off of that after we have a Volo on the board. Draw 3 cards. Then we have the treasure tokens if we had any creatures to play some duplicates with Volo's ability. Let's see what we hit. Come on, top deck. Oh no! Well, that is going to close things out for us this game. Can't do anything about the trample there. We can block and still die. Of course, there's 2 flyers, so even without the trample, block there and die to that one. Yeah, that'll do it. That will close out this game from the Hall of Monsters deck. And Skemfar Shadow Sage to finish it off. Hit us for that last bit of damage with the Enter the Battlefield effect here. Another defeat. Alright, so here we are in our next round. We are going to be trying out the Haunted House deck this time around. Blue-white spirits with the red splash for some flashback cards. So a lot of cards that are resilient. They come back from the grave for more value later in the game. We are going to keep this hand. We have several early game plays. We have turn 1 Stonebinder's Familiar thanks to this Fury Calm Snarl, and then we can play this Pathway for the blue mana to play turn 2 Angler into turn 3 Archivist. Really quick hand here with the late game bomb of Alrund's Epiphany. So it's got all you want. Early game plays and a late game finisher. Let's see how this hand runs for us. So turn 1 Stonebinder's Familiar, the Spirit Dog here, will be getting a +1/+1 counter every time that we cast a card from our grave, because we will be exiling our flashback cards. I suppose it would be getting a +1/+1 counter when our disturbed creatures die, not when we cast them from the grave, because it gets them when we exile cards, not when we remove them from grave. But either way, it does get tapped down immediately, so the Stonebinder's Familiar not really going to be doing anything, locked down by the Bind the Monster. So we are playing against the blue-green deck here, the Hall of Monsters. The kind of singleton creature deck, a bunch of various good creatures of all kinds of creature types, with a playset of Volo to lead them to victory and make a bunch of duplicates. So we're going to attack aggressively with all of our early game creatures in this deck, because that will throw them in the graveyard to come back later with their disturb abilities. And with double Quintorius in hand now as our draws, we are definitely going to be getting some spirit tokens when we recast things from the grave. So Archivist here, going to go ahead and discard one of these Quintorius. They are legendary, so the second is a little redundant. And the blue-green deck does not have a ton of removal that can get stuff off the board. It mainly has just these Bind the Monsters to keep things tapped down. So as long as we've got one Quintorius on the field to do that secondary effect, we'll be fine. So we don't have a turn 4 play here, so we might as well play the Evolving Wilds, get the tapped land out of the way. Now that our opponent has a 2/3, we can't attack well with the 2/1, but we'll send in the 3/2 here. We could go on the defensive and just hold it back, but I'm feeling frisky. I'm feeling frisky with a Quintorius coming up next turn to give our whole field +1/+0. Try to get in for some big attacks there. And of course the turn 6 Alrund's Epiphany is going to lead into some big attacks as well. If our opponent's field is tapped down, that is. Alright, so we have double blue available, double red available. We don't have double white available though, so I'm probably just going to Evolving Wilds for a white just in case. Maybe we're supposed to pick blue. Blue's probably the most prominent color in this deck. I think I just grab a Plains here. Let's keep all of our mana pretty equal. And a Stonebinder's Familiar is the draw. That's cute, but not super good here. Let's just cast a Quintorius. Now, when we get these back from the grave, we get 3/2 spirit tokens, and they will have 1 more power. Do I even attack with Angler now? Probably not. Because we could attack with Angler just to throw it in the grave so that we can bring it back, get a token, make it bigger, all that stuff. But our opponent also has really bad attacks with anything they have on the ground if we just have a single Disturb token left back here. So I'll just hold it back. Owl Bearer turn 5 from our opponent, draws a card when it comes into play, quite nice. Alright, the pack tactics going off now. They're going for the big attacks so they can venture into the Lost Mine of Phandelver with the pack tactics trigger. So we will be getting good value from holding Baithook Angler back. We get to kill their 3/2 now. And then of course recast the Angler, get a 3/2 of our own on the board, get a bunch of tokens. Yeah, I don't have the mana to Alrund's Epiphany, so we have a really great use of our mana here. Get to use all 5 by going Familiar, Angler, and then holding up the Sacred Fire to clear out their flyer. Oh yeah, and they only have a 4/4 to block with. So if they block here, we finish it off with Sacred Fire, and we have another card to bring back from our grave, which is beautiful. We're gaining 2 life here, so I don't feel bad about not having this to kill the flyer, because we also have a 2/2 flyer left to block it. That was an excellent turn. And now Quintorius just goes off if they don't get rid of him. Lotus Cobra from our opponent, that gives them an additional mana whenever they play a land. But it's just a 2/1. So, still feeling like our board has the sick nasty here. bind the monster on our flyer so they can keep chipping in with the adversary, or just stop that from damaging them. Right, they are going to keep chipping in with their flyer. We don't have the mana for the Epiphany yet, but we can go ahead and just recast a card from grave, go off with Quintorius and Familiar, and that is going to be too much from our opponent. They're going to scoop it up there, so I was going to slam down Archivist. Again, give us another 4/2 Spirit. Counter on Familiar. Actually, I keep forgetting. The Familiar, it's so weird that the Familiar and Quintorius work differently. Quintorius works when they leave the graveyard. Stonebinder's Familiar works when they get exiled. So again, not putting a counter on Familiar, but yes, getting a Spirit from Quintorius. And then, of course, we have the ability to draw discard whenever this attacks. So discard other disturbed cards like the Angler. Get closer to the lands we need for Sacred Fire and Alrund's Epiphany. Very good showing from the blue-white Disturbed deck there. And that will give us our first prize, the card style for Candle Grove Witch. Very beautiful card styles in this event. Very cool stuff. I will be representing these card styles in future drafts, definitely during the draft challenge coming up. All right, another game here with the Light Show deck. I will keep this hand. We have turn 2 Smoldrake. This is definitely a more awkward hand with a 4 or 5 mana card here. It's going to be slower for sure, but our mana base is pretty great here. The turn 2 egg is always going to be excellent. I'm not going to play the Snarl untapped because I'm just going to consider after we have the egg out. I do want to save all of the spells for that this time. Should have played the Frostboil Snarl there. I am still getting used to all the fancy standard lands as a exclusively limited player myself. Not exclusively, but as close as you can get. Playing against the blue-white-red deck here. The blue-white disturb kind of strategy. We might cycle this Creative Outburst just to get a treasure token, because it's going to be a long time before we're casting this. That would guarantee we get to cast Serpentine Curve next turn, which would be pretty big. 4 mana sorcery for the egg, as well as get a 2/2 onto the board, because Creative Outburst will be in the graveyard. Doesn't seem the worst to me. But Consider could be good too. Consider helps us make sure that we hit the 4th land, helps us dig for that, so we can just try to hit a land instead of discarding a good card for a treasure token. I could see an argument either way. Both seem pretty good to me. I think I'm going to go with Consider, because the worst case scenario here if we don't hit a land is that we can still divide by 0. Ooh, and getting another Consider is super sweet, because we get to cast that, get another counter on the egg, and then keep the island here for next turn. And that means the Serpentine Curve is going to be big. Well, not massive, but, you know, a 3/3. Alright, well, our opponent has some good Disturb cards on the board to come back as some good Flying Spirits in the future. Ooh, discard an Alrund's Epiphany. So they must have some good cheap cards in hand then. Alright, kind of like running out Seize the Storm, but Divide by 0 also seems pretty huge to me. Because Divide by 0 flips the egg, then grabs our 2 mana card to give us another instant or sorcery to then cast. So let's bounce their most expensive card. Pick up our 2 mana sorcery, Environmental Sciences here. This gives us, or gets us closer to casting Creative Outburst. Yeah, absolutely massive there. We flip the Ashmouth Dragon, cast Environmental Sciences, kill probably the 1/1 there, since the Graphkeeper can come back as a 3/1 flyer. Kill the Familiar there, grab a land, attack with a 4/4 flyer there, and then from that point on, we're just running with gas with a flipped Ashmouth Dragon on the board. Then we just start casting a bunch of Seize the Storms as giant tramplers while we're shredding their board every time we cast something. And we'd have 6 mana because of the Environmental Sciences, so very close to also casting a massive Creative Outburst. So too much for our opponent. They're going to scoop them up and leave that game there. So that gives us our next prize, the Harvesttide Infiltrator style. Pretty cool one. Alright, here we are with Old Time Revival, the Black-White Clerics deck. Got some good plays turn 2, Disciple and Grasp. Good stuff turn 3 and onward if we hit lands, but I think it's a bit too risky here, stuck on one color. I'm going to take the mulligan, and this is much better mana-wise. However, Still stuck on just like 3 lands. But because the cleric can be played as Basilica, I think we're pretty safe here. So I'm going to keep this. And with Teleportation Circle in hand to combo with Priest and Jaren, that's excellent. Even with Shadow Sage to drain a bunch of life. I don't know what I want to get rid of. I don't want to get rid of a land because we definitely want to hit 4 mana. I guess we get rid of a Shadow Sage because we have pretty good enter the battlefield effects even without it to copy up. Let's play our Skyclave Basilica turn 1. It's the only land here that definitely comes in tapped. The Snarl can come into play untapped if we have a Plains or Swamp in hand. And I think it's more than likely enough that we'll need to play this as the land half that we can just run it out turn 1. Alright, Eye Twitch from our opponent, a 1/1 flyer. When it dies, they learn. Alright, no turn 2 play, so we can go ahead and play our other tapped land turn 2. And turn 3, we're going to run out a Priest of Ancient Lore here, trying to draw into the 4th land for Teleportation Circle to hopefully go off. But we are against the black-green Sacrifice deck here with 2 cards that have good abilities when they die. The Eye Twitch lets them learn a lesson when it dies, and the Vengeful Strangler can turn into a removal spell when it dies. It slaps itself onto one of our cards and makes us sacrifice a card every turn and lose a life. But if we get a Teleportation Circle out before this flips, we can just Teleportation Circle whatever they throw a Strangling Grasp on and get rid of it that way. So not a super great removal spell against our deck. And we did redraw our Shadow Sage here, so we'll have that big game ender to try to close things out with Teleportation Circle as well. Alright, so they do go ahead and Village Rites to sacrifice the card to Strangling Grasp, but this triggers during their upkeep, which means we still get to turn 4, play our Pathway, Teleportation Circle, exile the Priest, blink it before the Strangling Grasp kills it, so we still get to counter the Strangling Grasp here, so that actually ends up quite excellent for us. So Teleportation Circle it is. Get a crisp, clean way to get rid of their removal spell and gain a life and draw a card here. Windows is mad at me. Alright. Things are looking very pretty over here. We gain a life and draw a card every turn until they kill our Priest of Ancient Lore, and then once we have more than enough cards on board and in hand and all that, we just start pivoting and using the Shadow Sage to make our opponent lose X life every turn. We have a definite game plan here. It's looking spicy, and Lunarch Veteran's going to stack on some more life gain for us with Teleportation Circle. That seems pretty good to me. I think we go Veteran into Jaren here and then keep bouncing the Priest. We could play the Shadow Sage right now, but I'm just going to keep bouncing the Priest for a while anyway. So let's just get some more creatures on the board, more blockers on the ground, more life gain from the Veteran. But still just gaining life and drawing cards for now. Definitely stopping all of that Eye Twitch damage, at least with the amount of life gain we're doing. And we've got 3 clerics on the board now. Elderfang Disciple next turn will be the 5th. Shadow Sage would do 6 damage after we have all that on the board. So we could start pivoting to just damaging our opponent with Shadow Sage pretty soon here. Our opponent's deck, the one thing we really have to worry about is the black-green deck does have 3 copies of the Meat Hook Massacre, which can wipe our whole board and make us lose a bunch of life as well. Alright, and there's one for -1 here. Gonna get rid of everything but Jaren. Jaren, of course, can Teleportation Circle and come right back, plus gives us a 1/1 for one of our humans dying there. So not the worst Meat Hook Massacre ever. I was going to be really worried about a Meat Hook Massacre for -3/-3, but our opponent seems to be under enough pressure here that they're cool with the -1/-1 Meat Hook Massacre there. We're cool with it as well, because we have at least 1 card staying on this board to combo off with Teleportation Circle. So that's 1 Meat Hook Massacre down, only 2 more in the deck to worry about, but those are certainly huge, huge cards from the green-black deck. But we're getting pretty close to casting these Emeria's Calls, which will be big finishers as well, getting 2 4/4 Flying Angels each time. So we're going to keep playing our lands and hoping to get to that. That'll be pretty sweet. So Elderfang Excuse me. Elderfang Disciple, make our opponent discard a card here and then drop a Shadow Sage. Have our opponent lose some life here as well. We're pretty cool just running everything onto the board, even if they massacre us again. We will have these 2 Amiria's Calls to try to come back from a massacre. And I think I'd rather get another 1/1 onto this board than do another 3 damage, because it could be more damage over time. It's going to be several attacks to kill our opponent here. Does play worse if they have the second Meat Hook Massacre. Alright, Pest Summoning it is. Just getting some chump blockers out this turn. So not bad for us at all. Alright, there's the 7th mana for Amiria's Call. Let's go. Give the whole field indestructible. Get some 4/4 flyers and slam on in. Our opponent's down to 15 now. We're going to start using the Shadow Sage again, have our opponent keep losing life here, because now we have more than enough creatures to finish them off, especially if we do some extra damage with Shadow Sage. Alright, we'll see what they've got here. Down to 12, 6 cards in hand. They could Massacre for -3/-3. If they play another land, they could Massacre for -4/-4, wipe the whole board. So, Meat Hook Massacre is still an out. Still a potential win condition from our opponent. But without it, we're in a very good spot. And Old Stick Fingers it is. Going to mill them till they hit a bunch of creatures and they get a 6/6 on the board. Well, we've got a bunch of flyers out. We have enough to get lethal here if we just attack with everybody but the Shadow Sage and bounce the Shadow Sage. So that'll be game. Oh, I'm 1 damage off, never mind. I had to play a cleric and then do that. Well, a misplay from us, but pretty sure it's still game here. We did have to send in the attack with those 1/1s. Our math was woefully wrong. Alright, and just some ground blockers here so the Angels will still go ahead and finish things off for us. So there we go. And there is the concession from our opponent. And we get to check our sweet card style reward here. Dawnheart Mentor. Very fancy style on that one. Pretty great green card in draft. Alright, so here we are with the green-black deck, the scary Storytime deck. This is a green-black sacrifice deck. Lots of creatures with good abilities when they die, like the Shambling Ghast. Lots of life drain to do to our opponent when our creatures are dying, with cards like the Meat Hook Massacre. And of course, just having 3 copies of the Meat Hook Massacre being a pretty big reason to be playing this deck. That is a huge bomb every time you cast it. Big board wipe that makes your opponent lose a bunch of life as well. So let's get in for a damage here and then go ahead and see what we draw off of the Village Rites, I think, because we're not really going to get there off of a 1/1 and we don't have any other threats in hand here, so we'll see if we can't draw into one off of the Village Rites. Alright, Daemongoth Woe Eater eventually, but for now, just going to play a tapped land and hold off. Could do a one-sided Meat Hook Massacre eventually here, because we don't really have any more gas to play for a while. So this was an awkward keep, but we had some very powerful cards like Meat Hook Massacre that make me feel like the hand is a keep, because that card is just so huge every time it comes out. Alright, now we have Old Stick Fingers to play as a threat here. Turn 3 seems good to me. We'll go for a green source here, so we have double green and double black available. Keep our treasure token here to cast the Dreadhound a little sooner. Or to Village Rites if they try to kill Old Stick Fingers, our buddy here. But I don't think I want to run out a Daemogoth Woe Eater just to have our opponents discard a card and us draw a card and gain a life. So Shipwreck Sifters from our opponent. They are playing the blue-white Spirits deck with red for Quintorius. Alright, well, tapped land here. Kind of like going for the Woe Eater, but I also like having the mana for the Dreadhound. I really don't know what I want to do here. The Woe Eater with Village Rites in hand is pretty good, because then when its ability, before its ability triggers, I think we can Village Rites and sacrifice it. I guess we can't, because it happens at our upkeep, right? And we can't stop during our untap here. It just says stop on the upkeep. So we can't sacrifice it before its ability goes on the stack. So we'll have to sacrifice 2 creatures if we Village Rites and Woe Eater. So that's actually probably not great. I guess we just pass the turn here, save the treasure token for Dreadhound, or to have the mana to cast Woe Eater and Village Rites in the same turn, which would be great. Alright, Bait Hook Angler coming on out. 2 mana, 2/1, turns into a 1/2 flyer when they flip it, and a counter on the Shipwreck Sifters from the Homestead Courage. So attacking with a 3/4 here. Old Stick Fingers isn't going to get that big that quickly here. We could just draw some cards off Stick Fingers. We're very likely to cast a Massacre that'll be big enough to kill it pretty soon anyway. So let's just go ahead and draw the cards here. See if we can't get our lands for that Dreadhound. We certainly got our 5th land, which means we can just slam down a 6 mana 6/6. Definitely big enough to survive a Massacre and stay on the board, drain our opponent for more life with its ability whenever a creature dies or is put into a graveyard. Unfortunately, we mill 3 lands with the Dreadhound, so we will not be doing any damage to them with its mill ability. Skyclave Apparition is the play from our opponent. Can only exile cards with mana value 4 or less. That's okay, opponent. I totally forgot as well, because I don't play Standard either. So that went pretty poorly for our opponent, unfortunately. And we need 1 more mana before we can Massacre all their creatures away, so I don't want to do it just yet. Woe Eater, or we could just make a bunch of tokens. Hunt for specimens into something else. We again don't have the mana to Woe Eater and Dispute It, and I don't want to attack in with Dreadhound. So I don't love this, but I'm going to hunt for specimens and grab some kind of sweet lesson here. Environmental Sciences gets us to enough Meat Hook Massacre mana for next turn to clear their whole board. That actually seems pretty sick. Mascot Exhibition's also pretty good, but obviously I'm not going to want to cast that until after the Massacre. Let's go Exhibition. That's just a big, powerful, chunky card, and we can dispute, sacrifice a pest, and use the treasure token for the Massacre in the future. So that's pretty sweet. There are a lot of sweet synergies in all of these decks. There's definitely a lot of replayability with these pre-constructed decks. If you just really like the look of one of these decks and you just get into this event and you have your favorite deck to play, you'll definitely keep finding new, powerful interactions within the decks the more you play them. So you could definitely just choose your favorite deck and run it all the way to your 5 victories in this event and have a good time, I think. There's a lot of sweet stuff going on in these decks. Alright, so Deadly Dispute, gonna draw some cards, get us a treasure, and it'll be time for the big Massacre here, I think. Black, black, and 4. Seems good to me. R.I.P. opponent's board. And the Massacre and the Dreadhound's just going to start shredding our opponent there. And I just realized I still have the Bolas avatar on from when I played that Bolas Historic Brawl. So we have the evil avatar on here. So Quintorius into Homestead Courage, pretty sick combo. I don't really want to Meat Hook Massacre immediately again because we won't do 5. We won't kill Quintorius. They could double block here, kill the Dreadhound. Kind of like Strangler, sacrificing the Strangler to throw this onto Quintorius, so they have to keep sacrificing a card every turn. That seems pretty good to me. We, of course, get to draw some more cards this way as well, which is great. And then we can just cast a Stick Fingers. That'll be somewhat large. A 3/3 for 2 mana. Ooh, Jadar. Jadar is just massive. With all of our ways to sacrifice stuff, getting a Decayed Zombie every turn is excellent. So I'm actually just going to slam down Jadar there. Because Jadar replaces your Decayed Zombie every single turn. So with, of course, the Meat Hook Massacre and Dreadhound in conjunction, our opponent is losing 2 life every time one of our creatures dies. So with those Decayed Zombies, that really stacks up quickly, and our opponent's already down to 10 life. So excellent draw there, Jadar. Alrund's Epiphany is the play from our opponent. They're going to take an extra turn here, get a couple 1/1 flyers. Seven mana up now. If they've drawn a second Alrund's Epiphany, they could cast that and just do it all again. But I believe there are only 2 copies of Alrund's Epiphany in that deck. Alright, so Hook Haunt Drifter. Going to get another creature from Quintorius' ability. But the more creatures they have, the more damage this second Meat Hook Massacre is going to do. That is very much going to finish off the game here. I think that's kind of just the name of the game in this green-black deck. It's really all in on the Meat Hook Massacre. You have tons of card draw with 4 copies of Village Rites, 4 copies of Deadly Dispute, even Demogoth Woe Eater drawing you a card when it gets sacrificed. You have a lot of ways to dig for those Meat Hook Massacres to just shred the board and drain your opponent for a bunch of life each time. I think this is really just Meat Hook Massacre the deck, and that is certainly how we are going to win this game. Just slam down a Meat Hook Massacre again next turn. Our opponent is going to lose 1,000,000 life here, and it should close things out. So we'll do that just to kind of counter the life gain there, make sure we're still dealing like infinite damage with this next Meat Hook Massacre. They are legendary, but of course you still get that massive enter the battlefield effect from them to clear the board and do a bunch of damage to your opponent. So still going to end the game here for sure. And here we go. This should very much be lethal. Doesn't matter which one we keep, we get the enter the battlefield effect either way, and that is a boatload of lose 1 life triggers for our opponent. Victory for the green-black deck. And that is the 4th win. Only 1 deck to play and 1 more win. Let's move on to the red-black deck with a token sub-theme, some snowlands, and 6 planeswalkers within the Wax Museum deck. Alright, now here we are with the black-red deck. This is a little bit of a token deck, a little bit of a planeswalker deck, a little bit of a lot going on in this deck. The kind of theme of this one's a little less clear to me, but a pretty powerful deck. It has 6 planeswalkers in it. It's got these Grim Wanderers that there's a lot of ways to get these out early. You have some Decayed Zombies from Rotten Reunion. We have cheap removal spells like Poison the Cup. A bunch of stuff like that. So we're going to keep this hand. Pretty good curve. Historian Wanderer and Poison the Cup all being early game plays, and Doomscar Titan kind of a game ender for later. We are against the blue-white-red deck again. The deck focused around casting a bunch of stuff from your graveyard and having a lot of spirits, as you can see from the Spirit Dog here, and the ability to get +1/+1 counters as they exile cards. Alright, let's send in the Historian. If we trade here, we are happy with that because we get to slam down a 5/3. And the trade occurs, so we get to slam down a 5/3, and we have the Historian's ability later to get a 3/2 token out of it from the graveyard. So Grim Wanderer it shall be on turn 3 there. Hear ye, hear ye. Grim Wanderer, turn 3. Overwhelmed Archivist, draw, discard a card, and discard a Hook Haunt Drifter. Good combo there. Get some extra value that way. We can keep the board clear with a Frostbite, because it does have 3 power, so it would kill the Wanderer, and when it comes back from the grave, it only has 2 power, so the board will be clear enough for Wanderer to keep getting in there. Seems good to me. Let's Frostbite that 3/2. Foretell this Doomscar Titan, so it's our play for next turn, a big old 5/4 haste. That also makes our Grim Wanderer 6/3 till end of turn. Should lead into a really big attack next turn. And Skyclave Apparition from our opponent there. That is going to go ahead and get the Grim Wanderer off the board. We can poison the cup on that, but it will just spit out a 2/2 token on our board. We just get an XX equal to the mana value of whatever they killed. So not the greatest use of poison the cup. Just going to drop down Doomscar Titan and slam in for 5. They are down to 10 now, choosing not to block there. So we've got some great early aggression here, but we're running out of cards. If our opponent finds some ways to get rid of this Doomscar Titan, get some more blockers on this board, stuff like that, they could very much come back this game, and that is how it's looking so far. 2 blockers this turn. So they have a while to survive our Doomscar Titan. A pair of goblins here, that +2/+0 is not nothing. Potentially charging them to find lethal out of nowhere here. We have 5 mana up now. We can make a 3/2 from the grave, or we can make a couple 1/1s. I think we attack with the Doomscar Titan. I guess they can double block pretty well. If they double block, we kill all the creatures, because we do 2 damage to that, 2 damage to that. This will die, so that won't get +1/+1 anymore. Yeah, the attack's pretty fine. We have Poison the Cup as well if we want to keep Doomscar Titan on board. Alright, so they're just going to let it in. We could deal 6 damage instead of 4 if we cast the pair of goblins, but I don't think I want to do that. I'm going to just play a swamp and pass the turn here. I'm going to hold the pair of goblins in hand, so we might get them to not block Titan again, and then we just deal lethal if that happens. And then, of course, we also have the ability to make a 3/2 here if we want, or poison something with the cup if we want. That's the reason I didn't foretell Poison the Cup. If I foretold Poison the Cup, I wouldn't have the option of making a 3/2 here, and I like leaving all the options open. Alright, Archive Haunt. I find it highly unlikely they'll choose not to block next turn. But if they choose not to block, I mean, we are just killing them on the spot. So they only have 2 blockers here. If we Poison the Cup, we get a 2/2. They block a 4/4 and a 2/2. We make 2 goblins. They take 2 damage. I don't think Poison the Cup is that great to just blow up the Apparition here. If we want to play real defensively, we could blow up the guy, stop the most damage that way by whittling down the other 2. But I think I want to play it aggressive. I like just exiling the Historian here, getting a 3/2. Holding on to the pair of goblins to give +2/+0 out of nowhere, so it's possible to find lethal. Alright, Tybalt's a huge draw. We do need 1 more mana before we can cast Tybalt. But if we cast a Tybalt, that's going to be massive. I suppose we kind of just die on the crackback if we don't kill them here. So, the question is, do we Poison the Cup before combats, or do we just attack in and see what happens? I feel like they're probably blocking our Doomscar Titan. The only way we win here is if they just choose not to block Doomscar Titan. I guess if both these creatures die, we get hit for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We get another turn after this, so just slamming down Poison the Cup here is not... It's not the worst. Let's just do it. Let's just do it and see what happens. Getting rid of the Graphkeeper, because they're more likely to want to block with that than the Archive Haunt. I think they're more likely to just let the damage through. If we just leave the flyer behind. Alright, there we go. They're going to take the trade on board and go to 2, but we have the +2/+0, and that will close out that game. That will be the 5th win of the event. We've played a little bit with each deck. And yeah, that's going to be the end of the video here. Let's see what our final card style is before I log off for the day. But it is certainly going to be beautiful. Loving all the card styles here. The final card style from the Harvest Fair Festival is the Catilda Dawnheart Prime card styles. So this actually ended up being a pretty sweet event all around. It is a pre-constructed deck event, so you're not getting any cards from playing this event outside of your regular daily and weekly quests, but I think the card styles all are very pretty, and the decks are pretty cool and pretty complex, pretty strategic, and have a lot of stuff going for them. So there was a good showing of each deck there, and yeah, that's the event. That'll end today's video. But as always, if you enjoy these videos, you can help me out by liking, commenting, and subscribing. That'll let the YouTube algorithm know that you're enjoying the videos, and it'll start sending them to yourself and others more frequently. So once again, thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you again very soon for some more Magic Arena.